experience using HP BSM. My name is Sandy Schubert. I'm one of the co-leaders of the Vivid Business Service Management Special Interest Group, as well as a co-leader of the Pittsburgh and Seattle Vivid chapters. I'm also the Director of Shared Services for J9 Technologies, a partner of HP Software specializing in the BSM tool. Next slide.
Sorry, there we go.
This webinar series is brought to you by the Vivid Business Service Management Special Interest Group, led by Jim Copio, Mark Laird, and myself. Our presenter today is Mary Kay Peterson. Mary Kay is the Director of IT Service and Management and Enterprise Security at Mentor Graphics in Oregon. She is a co-leader of the Vivid Service Management Special Interest Group and the chapter leader of the Oregon Vivid chapter. Some housekeeping. Today's live session is intended for all Vivid members, and the recording will be posted on Vivid's webinar section of the website for all Vivid members. If you have a question as we go along, please type and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. Here's a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel that usually appears in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. To submit a question, make sure the questions pane is expanded and type in your question and click on Send. So let's get started. We'll pass it over to Mary Kay.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. I'm here today to talk about Mentor Graphics implementation of HP BSM. We're calling it Measuring the Customer Experience. I've found that when I compare myself or I'm looking at software, it's interesting for me to know a little bit about the company who did an implementation. So as I compare myself and their experiences, I have some kind of backdrop about the company. So Mentor Graphics itself is a software manufacturer founded in 1981, so we've been around a good long time. We primarily do software in the space of electronic design automation, and I'll share a little bit about that in a second. We're publicly held, so quarter ends and reporting quarterly earnings are very important. We just passed $1 billion in revenue. That was a significant milestone for us at our year end. We're headquartered here in Wilsonville, Oregon. We have about 5,000 employees located worldwide at 70 sites, and about 5% of the employees are IT employees. And we have a work from anywhere workforce, and so even though we do have 70 sites, we do try to enable technology so people can work wherever they are. Our company strategy is we target chip and board designers, so we develop software used by people that have EE, electrical engineering degrees, to design chips and boards. And you can see some of our emerging markets. We definitely try to target markets where our competitors are not, and we have been getting into things like aerospace, automotive, high-tech, and mobile devices. Myself, I joined the company in 1994 on a 5-year plan. I'm still here. I started with implementing ERP applications, SAP at Mentor Graphics. I've done CRM, done many of the jobs within IT. While I was running global operations, I stumbled across the ITIL framework and eventually became the champion and department manager of service management. And internally, I'm certainly champion of our employees, who we certainly call our customers, and running IT as a business. And then it was already mentioned I am a Vivid chapter leader. If we look at the IT organization and how we're broken down, the areas in blue are what we call enterprise services, so we try to make those as consistent across the globe. And in this space of global operations and software solutions is really where we targeted our first monitoring efforts. And you can see enterprise security is one of the functions I own, as well as service management. The three tenets we have within IT is, one, innovation. We are a company of software engineers, and we are forever trying to help deliver leading-edge products and services to those engineers to enable multi-site collaboration. We have engineering teams that are trying to work together across the globe. We have a strong focus on customer service and operations, and then certainly the people of Mentor really are Mentor, and so empowering our teams and employees. So I guess it was probably in 2007 we came upon as we discovered the ITIL framework, we came upon a recognition that IT needed its own portfolio of software to run its business, and we came up with this picture and kind of colloquially called it, we needed our own ERP system. And that's when we started shopping for software. So we had a program management office at that time. Service management was the function that I owned. And then I have peers that are running the IT operations and facilities functions. Within service management, you can see, the portfolio of things that I've been driving, global help desk, and we have a vision for a global operations center that is being driven by the help desk right now. Service monitoring and reporting is really what I'm going to talk to you about today, and service level management is something that we are looking at as a next step. I also own marketing and communications, strategic vendor management, asset and contract management, change management, and we are looking at a configuration management database. So certainly all of these things are process areas that we discovered that was growing a market of software when we started looking in 2007 that was trying to help address running those kinds of processes. So we did a selection process and did select HP as our strategic vendor. We found them through a company called Mercury. I think we were just about ready to buy Mercury when HP bought them. And you can see the long list of software that we have acquired since that time. It started out with Service Manager, followed by Asset Manager, then DDMI, and then HP BSM and SiteScope are some of the more recent purchases. So the challenge from my CIO, this is Anantha Dandri, I report directly to him, is that it's the very typical story where IT is reporting metrics, the business looks at the metrics and says, that's not been my experience. Our end users were definitely finding problems before we did. We had component level monitoring, but component level monitoring doesn't give you the end user perspective. And so we set out, embarked on a project about 2 years ago to look at monitoring from an end user perspective. And this was our project objective statement. So our approach, and I thought it would be interesting to share this approach, not necessarily unique, but something I think we did that helped us be more successful, certainly was to conduct an assessment. And J9, who actually is part of this SIG, stepped in and helped us with identifying a roadmap or a set of gaps in a roadmap. Typically we do an RFP with vendors. Since HP was already a strategic vendor, we look at them first, and sometimes the question is, why not HP? Because we look to the integrations with HP. I guess I would say don't underestimate how difficult it is to integrate across vendor products, even though they may tell you it's easy or we have an integration. It usually requires a fistful of dollars and somebody's time to get it done. Once we have selected a winner through an RFP, we do a proof of concept, and we did that with HP, where we brought the products in and actually had their engineers kick the tires. And At the end of the proof of concept, we'll make a value decision. Do we think the software is going to do for us what we would like it to do? And in this case, we answered yes. In fact, we've been looking at the Mercury product since about 2005. So the next step is something that's unique. Even though HP would have loved to have sold me all the software I would need to cover every application at Mentor, we decided to do a small paid pilot. So we selected a couple of key services. One of them was email. Everybody lives and dies on email these days. And the next was a business service that's used to deliver our software. And part of the infrastructure sits at Mentor. Part of the infrastructure sits at an external an external service provider. So we thought trying to figure out how to jump the chasm into the cloud, so to speak, would be something interesting. At the end of a pilot, we again make a value decision and then either walk away or scale based on what the pilot results are. Another key strategy that we use is that we use consulting to implement, but ultimately train our staff. I look at consultants as personal trainers for our organization. So our journey began with J9, as I previously mentioned, doing a free assessment for us, and so they certainly use that as a way to entice us to take a risk and use them as a provider. The assessment was, I would say, fairly lightweight, but some of the challenges we gave to J9 is, one, review our current monitoring landscape, and where practical, we wanted to leverage our current investments. So if I already had component monitoring in place, for the data center, my first problem wasn't to rip and replace that. I wanted to find the gaps in our monitoring and address those first. So J9 helped us identify gaps and then build a roadmap into how we could address those gaps. And then the next was a paid-for pilot where we selected the software delivery business transaction. We bought SiteScope, we bought APM 360 and some SiteScope points and consulting, and conducted this 90-day pilot. At the end of the pilot, what we discovered, or what was highlighted on our roadmap, was, one, migrating from a place of having SLOs, which is service level objectives, to true SLAs with customers. The second was looking at validating performance of key business applications. And then finally, what we decided on as far as where our value proposition was is deploying event management, end user and application monitoring, and unifying our system and business process monitoring into to provide a central visibility and establish a central operations bridge. There we go. So our project objectives became, first of all, really ratifying that list of critical IT services. So we're an SAP shop. People can say SAP is important, but not all within SAP is equal. When you're a software business and people can order things really up to the last minute and in the quarter, being able to book orders and deliver software is critical transactions within SAP. So I would say one of the the most beneficial outcomes of this objective was really agreeing with our customers on what's critical and what defines success. And I would say of all the things in this project, that was probably one of the most beneficial outcomes. The second was measurement of critical services from a user perspective. So again, we were really, frankly, blind into the end user experience. We had component level monitoring that could tell you if a server or a database was up or down, but we couldn't tell if, for example, order processing was healthy unless we called the order processing department and asked how things were going. Again, our goal from the CIO was to find out that we were having issues before our customers did. A next area was performance trending and out-of-bounds alerts. So as a global company, we host all of our business applications out of Wilsonville, Oregon here. Of course, performance on the LAN is quite good, but as you step away from Wilsonville and try to use SAP, we really needed visibility into performance of our applications. And to be able to understand if things are trending in an unfavorable direction and address those before our users brought those issues to our attention. Next area was centralizing visibility of IT alerts. So again, we had component level monitoring, pagers firing to system administrators all over the globe, but really didn't have central visibility into what was going on. And the last area is consistent critical incident response process by centralizing alerts, by having a process everyone agrees on. When we do have an incident, we certainly reduce our time to respond with better incident handling. The implementation, so we defined about 30 business transactions that we felt were critical to the business, and we broke the project into batches. For each transaction or I guess business process area such as order entry, we gave them a budget of 3 to 5 transaction points to figure out if that transaction was healthy. One of the first things that we discovered is that the technology, BPM, Business Process Monitor, was fairly easy to build transactions. However, the long path really was about Mentor Graphics as a company deciding on what to monitor. So the project manager established a startup kit for the application teams who wanted end-user monitoring of what are the prerequisites required before we can really engage and set up transaction monitors for you. So it would involve things like what are the transactions you want to monitor, and establishing, in some cases we had to establish a monitoring user, if you will. So if you wanted to log in and check that you could go log into a system, we certainly didn't want to use a developer account for that login. We had to establish a monitoring user. And then once we had the prerequisites set up, then we could schedule the consultant to come in and help us build the transactions. Although over time we really actually did most of the work in-house. And then a very important step is establishing a release process. Once you have a monitoring transaction in place, you have to align with the application release process so that if the application changes, then you have to consider, does your monitoring transaction need to change to incorporate whatever changes were made at the application level. This particular dashboard is not something you're going to find from HP. It's something we actually built ourselves using technology called ClickView. But this dashboard depicts the various applications or business process areas that we define. So ESDM, electronic software download mechanism, was the very complex transaction that touched things in-house Mentor Graphics and also in the cloud. And you can see that we show what the status is and then the last time the transaction was updated. You can actually see in red here where something failed, and it depicts where the failure occurred. Additionally, so this is really the overview dashboard. We do have a drill-in for performance and response over time and server uptime. Certainly one of the things that is key to establishing SLAs with customers is you have to be able to measure things. If you can't measure things, it's very, very difficult to make commitments. So the results were, as I mentioned, order fulfillment, system availability is vital to ensure we can book late in the quarter. Since we are a public company, we have to report our financials after the quarter end. That's another area where we placed some transaction monitors. And I would say one of the overarching things that really has happened is IT and the business engaged in talking about what's important, and the business feels a sense of confidence that IT knows what's critical, and we know if those transactions are functioning. And you can see a quote from our Director of Order, Global Operations, Chris Berger, that he gave IT that was a nice result to the project. From a lessons learned perspective, I think one of the most important things is that we're having data-driven discussions with the business. So rather than someone's perception that IT applications are always down, we actually have data on availability and performance to have those discussions. Discussing with the business on what specific transactions were critical and how best to monitor, I still say is one of the most priceless things about this project, and really forms the basis for SLA. So now we know what the transactions are. We are measuring baseline of performance, and now we can have discussions about, are things meeting expectations? If they are not, then what do we need to do to address that? An additional lesson was it really did take, in some cases, a much longer time than we anticipated to set up the monitoring user. Probably one of the more difficult ones was order entry, where we actually wanted to simulate across systems. We have found that some of our failure points are the interfaces between systems versus just the standalone system itself. And so we wanted to actually run transactions through order monitoring through to delivery. And so we had to work actually with our internal auditors on being able to describe what these dummy transactions were. And so when audits occurred, they understood that these $0 transactions did not certainly affect our financial reporting. Another lesson that we learned is that even though at times HP software feels like it's complex, in this particular case, we were very surprised at how easy it was to set up these synthetic transactions. And J9 certainly enabled us with the different flavors of transactions you can set up, teaching us how to fish, so to speak. But we are largely on our own setting up those transactions, and really only use J9 when we have bandwidth issues getting work done. The last point that I wanted to make is that this was one of our first experiences at buying HP software through a VAR instead of HP Direct. And one of the pleasant outcomes of this experience is that by having J9 doing the consulting for us, as well as providing our first-line support, we are really quick to conclude on, was it a configuration issue with the software, or is it really an HP bug and that needs to get filed? And J9 certainly has good contacts inside of HP to help us escalate anything that is that has been critical. So I really look to this kind of model as I buy HP software in the future to get my support through the VAR that helped me do the configuration. So we were getting about halfway through the project, and then the president of the company asked an interesting question and created sort of a bonus project within the project. And his question was a fair one, which is, are we fully utilizing our server investments? So while we had been spending all of our time really looking at end-user transaction experience, he pulled us into a project, and we happened to have some site scope points. Site scope is really more of the component level monitoring points available to very quickly deploy to about 2,100 servers and establish a consistent capacity planning mechanism. So initially we were looking at CPU and memory on all engineering standalone servers. We use grid and also virtual servers to try to determine how we make capital investments. probably about 3-4 years ago, IT became the procurement arm for engineering for buying new equipment. And without any sort of economics in the equation, engineering could ask for equipment, and IT had really little defense to decide whether that investment should be made or not. So SiteScope here is really, again, allowing us to make decisions with data. In the first quarter that we deployed, we deflected about 90% of our server capital, while we were really trying to determine if it made sense to make capital investments. So again, engineers are having data-driven discussions with engineering. So where do we go from here? So in the beginning, I guess we were blind from the end user experience. We definitely have monitoring in place so we can see what our critical transactions are. We certainly have established credibility on our ability to deliver monitoring as a service within the business and within IT. So as part of putting together budget for this year, I had my peers in business operations and engineering operations step forward and ask the question about getting SiteScope deployed for their operations under the business data center, and also we are standing up some new regional data centers. Another next step is looking at a product called DDMA, which allows you to map relationships between components and then link them to business services. So we are going to do a pilot this year with DDMA and standing up our first use CMDB. And then last, looking at further deployment of BPM for kind of a next tier of applications. Once you get this kind of visibility in place, you really want it in as many places as you can where you have applications deployed that users are counting on. And then last areas are looking at Operations Manager, OMI, as a way to consolidate events across our component monitoring. And then we've been evaluating HP Service Health Reporter for capacity planning. And with that, that is what I have to share with you all this morning. Available here for a bit longer for questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary Kay, for sharing your experiences with us today. We do have several questions that we're going to go through, so if any of the rest of you have any questions, now would be the time to submit them. The first question that we have is, did you perform an ROI analysis?
Did we perform? I would say yes, we did, although it's very difficult to put an ROI on finding things before the customers do. In the business of mentor graphics with EDA software, competition is not necessarily just a click away. The technical sales cycle takes anywhere from maybe 3 to 9 months long, and so that phenomena made it difficult for us over time to try to justify these kinds of purchases. But again, the CIO endorsed that it was important for us to find things before the users did.
Okay, the next question is, how many SiteScope points did you start with for around 2,100 servers?
For SiteScope, we had about 4,500 points, and so the way that SiteScope works is that with every metric you desire to measure, it requires a point. And so with the servers, we chose CPU utilization and memory utilization as the first two metrics, which consumed 2 points. So for 2,100 servers, you would need 4,200 points.
Okay, the next one is, why was it necessary to build your own dashboard? Was the BSM, sorry, this is a long one, was the BSM dashboard, I can't get the rest of the question on this one.
I would guess I can kind of get the gist
Oh,
of it.
was the BSM dashboard inadequate? I apologize.
Okay. So what we found is that, and I've actually challenged my group again with this question: why are we building our own dashboard when one came with BSM? We have done a lot of our reporting using ClickView technology, and what I have found is that our time to market of dashboard level down to detail level is just much faster with ClickView. So while we could certainly mock up some level of dashboard within BSM, and I would encourage you all, if you're exploring that, to definitely look at what comes with BSM. We found it just aligned with other strategy to use ClickView for reporting.
Okay. One is, are you using OMI? I think you said that you're considering that.
We are actually considering that right now, yep. Okay. And that's really consolidation of events because, certainly a next step. Right now our monitoring sends an email to the help desk, and that triggers our critical incident response process. A next step is really to really automatically feed those alerts into HP Service Manager, and that is best done through an integration using OMI.
Okay. The next question is, did you consider HP Operations Manager for any agent-based monitoring, and why or why not?
Say again, for any agent-based monitoring?
Yes.
We looked at it, but I guess really arrived at SiteScope as being as providing good enough monitoring for us. I guess my experience over time with monitoring, and everybody has certainly different experiences, is that you can gather a lot of metrics with some of these tools, but you really have to ask yourself the question, what are you really going to use at the end of the day? You can fill up disks full of metrics, but unless you have somebody who's going to spend time, and unless it's driving some kind of decisions, it's not necessarily helpful. The one thing we did like about SiteScope is it is agentless, and it was very quick to deploy.
Okay. The next question was similar to that on Operations Manager. So can you explain more about the value-based decision-making process you went through when moving from POC to pilot and to full deployment?
Yeah. Actually, that's a great point, because I think there is a point I missed there. The POs, the proof of concept that we did, really the paid for, first it was really bringing HP in here for maybe less than a week, just to kind of show us the technology. You see things on PowerPoint, they seem conceptually interesting, but it's really bringing the software in here, standing it up and saying, how hard is this to do? Do we see the value in a very limited way? The paid-for pilot really gave us the ability to kick the tires of this technology, understand what it was going to take to manage over time, what kind of resources were we going to need, did we really get the time to market? But I think one of the most priceless things about that pilot was we understood the HP licensing model a whole lot better, and so when we did make our purchase, we purchased exactly what we thought we were going to use, and did not end up with shelfware. So we originally bought the APM 360 licenses and discovered there were only 2 of the products within the 5 that come with APM that were going to work for Mentor. So we bought those 2 products and no more. And I would say at the end of this, the good news is we fully deployed everything we bought. That doesn't always happen. It always seems like there's extra pieces and parts that you bought that you thought you were going to use that just didn't happen for whatever reason.
Do you use templates for SiteScope to deploy standard monitors?
We do, and we came up with and that was one of the ways that SiteScope helps bring a quick time to market. You build a template for the servers, and I think it probably involves CPU and memory, which is probably a fairly simple template, and then you just deploy it in mass. So if we want to update that template. We can update it and, again, deploy en masse. Right now for the Business Data Center, we're working on defining what metrics we want to gather for that operation, and we'll design a template that can be deployed consistently across the data center.
Okay. What type of monitoring are you performing with SiteScope? Anything besides performance related?
Well, a byproduct of performance is availability. So the two key metrics that we are looking at right now are availability of systems and performance.
Okay.
So those are really the two that we're looking at.
Were you using only SiteScope for component-based monitoring, or agents also?
We are using only SiteScope. Now, in some part of the operation with Mentor, we still have some traditional component-based monitoring going on with some open source products like Nagios and Hobbit, some other competing products from Microsoft and Quest, and we're looking at deploying SiteScope across that landscape.
Okay. Are you integrated with any ticketing tool?
I would say the integration right now is manual, but HP Service Manager is our ticketing tool, and we're looking at the integration using OMI. So the events from SiteScope or BPM would go into OMI, and then the integration is between OMI and HP Service Manager.
Okay. I was wondering about implementing BPM monitoring for SAP. Did your accounting or compliance department have any issues with allowing a monitoring user to access SAP?
Heck yeah, absolutely. So that was one of the surprise ones where we wanted to actually use a synthetic transaction, and so ultimately what we did have finance involved. Order fulfillment, certainly since we were doing synthetic orders, probably revenue accounting, and our internal audit department. And what we did is really just fully disclosed what we were up to. We have a monitoring user that is booking $0 orders. We can produce reports that show that these are $0 orders. So from an audit perspective, you can clearly see we could show the capability of what this user can do inside of SAP, which is it certainly cannot transact real orders. So it did take a bit of time and convincing, but it was really we ultimately did achieve the ability to monitor order processing.
Okay. Are you utilizing the SLA feature in BSM, and what value do you feel that it provides?
Are we utilizing SLAs? I would say probably not fully, since we have pulled and are doing some of our SLA stuff outside of BSM. I'd probably have to follow up on that particular question. We are measuring two things. We're looking at availability of transactions, and we're looking at performance of transactions, baselining those metrics, and those will ultimately be used as part of our SLA discussions with our internal customer base.
Okay, I think you kind of addressed this with OMI, but are you using any topology-based event management?
Topology-based event management. I'm not sure what that means.
I think that will be more when you get into the OMI.
Okay.
Have you evaluated HP RUM to be used in conjunction with BPM?
Yes, we did evaluate that, and I actually just talked with my J9 consultant yesterday about real user monitoring is what RUM stands for. We are a highly virtualized environment. I think most, if not all, of our business apps, maybe sans the database backend, is virtualized, and we were not able to use RUM with our architecture.
Okay, I think you've kind of addressed this one already, but what product are you using to monitor your servers other than the CPU and memory from SiteScope?
It's SiteScope for all the engineering servers, and again, we have a variety of products.
Any automation like operations orchestration in place or planned?
There is actually on the engineering side of the house. They are looking at server automate, or actually we've done a pilot with server automation and operations orchestration. Operations orchestration is another thing we discussed yesterday, is something that could be used with monitoring. If you detect some kind of condition, you can then fire off operations orchestration to take some kind of step. It might be to restart a service. If the service still doesn't restart, then alert someone that something needs to be done. I would say that's kind of a next step in maturity. With a lot of this, I mean, HP sells a very holistic process flow. You have to decide, and for a company our size, we decided that gaining visibility into end-user experience was the first step we wanted to take, and now we will look at next steps in maturity.
How was your transition from BAC to BSM? With such a vast difference in the two versions, what was the most difficult task?
We were fortunate enough to really start out on BSM 9.0, so we did not have to make a 8 to 9 transition. We actually were probably one of the first customers, and I would say the only thing we were challenged with is that the consulting community, including J9, the product was very new to them as well. So there was a little bit of learning curve for everybody.
How do you address storage and network layer monitoring? How are they integrated into your monitoring suite?
At this point, they are separate. So we are using separate tools for network monitoring and storage resource management. Ultimately, the events certainly come together at the help desk level, but from a product perspective, they're separate right now. We're actually looking at HP product for networking right now.
Is SiteScope monitoring mostly Unix server or Windows server, or is it a combination of both?
It's both. It's definitely both.
All right. Any plans to use NNM for network monitoring and integrate that with BSM?
Evaluating.
Has BSM been stable for you?
I would say largely yes. I know that the upgrade we did to, I believe it was 9.1, we had some bumps. As I always certainly tell my team, I don't take upgrades just because they come out, because oftentimes you're fixing known bugs but introducing unknown. And so I think we had a little bit of instability, but J9 helped us work through it.
Did you run into any challenges politically in putting monitoring on the applications from the app owner, and how did you manage that?
That was interesting. The corporation here really seemed to want monitoring, and even though you might think that the application groups are saying like, oh no, Big Brother is here to watch us, I think they felt that their availability and performance was better than what was being characterized. So when you only have perception to deal with as your data points, those stories can get embellished as being something much bigger or uglier than what really is going on. So the apps team were actually really welcoming this, and I think from a business perspective, the business appreciated being engaged in the discussion about what they felt was vitally important, and then knowing that we were watching it. So it was positive, I think, all around.
Okay, and I have one more question. How many BPM probes have you deployed?
We have deployed, I think we're probably coming close to 150. Again, we gave a budget of 3 to 5 transaction points per per application. I think in some ways the apps team probably want more, and so we just started out with trying to get breadth of coverage first before we get into really depth of coverage.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that I have. Mary Kay, I'd like to thank you again so much for sharing with us today and taking the time to do so. I'd like to also thank all of you. It's great to have all of the questions, and so thank you very much for your participation. Just wanted to let you all know that this presentation will be posted to the Vivid website for your future reference. And also, in the next several weeks, be watching for a survey coming out to the BSM SIG. We'd like to know how we can best tailor the SIG to meet your needs. And then towards the end of May, we'll be holding our next BSM SIG webinar. So thank you again for your participation today, and have a great day.